Yeah, so the point is we not R. Let me write this. So we had say A naught square times dr square over 1 minus dr square, right?
Yes, yes,
Plus now what you have to do is that you write R A naught as your rho. Okay, this is a physical of T over A naught outside, which is of order 1 at present time. Right? So rho clearly is a physical distance, and in that coordinate you see that there is an A naught in the denominator.
this term will
So this term, basically the point is, what we know today is that A naught is so large that it's unobservable today, right? Which basically means that this, you can just set this equal to 0, right? So you cannot explore distances. If you could explore distances of the order of rho equal to A naught, you would have seen the effect of this term, right? But in no experiment we have seen the effect of this term, and that means A naught is large enough so that it's not within observed distance.
So there
this
is
is
no
a coordinate system throughout the
Exactly. Yeah. So basically, we can drop for all practical purpose for doing any calculation. You can just drop this term, right? Because as far as our universe today is concerned, right, we do not even know whether k is 1 or minus 1 or 0, right? But it's irrelevant because of this. If k is 1 or minus 1, it means that the A naught must be so large that it's not visible.
So there is no lower bound for this distance for which this metric is valid. Like you said, the upper bound for which this is
Yeah, lower one, of course, the metric is, I mean, of course, this metric is not valid over solar system, right? Because of the local fluctuations. This is based on homogeneous and isotropic metric, right? So the sun, the gravitational field around the sun is a Schwarzschild metric, right? Of course, that you don't see here, right? So this is valid over an average distance scale, right? So that way you can say that is a lower bound. That if too short a distance scale, this is not a valid metric that one should use.
So this metric is only valid at scales of megaparsec.
Exactly. Yeah. Where we average over all fluctuations, local fluctuations in galaxies, galaxy clusters, and so on.
length scale appears in the metric. So
this length scale is the
length scale appears in the metric. So
Well, length, even if the length scale doesn't appear in the metric, right, even if this was 0, right, which means that if the metric was at square times dx square plus dy square plus dz square, right, this is not the correct metric for the solar system, right? The metric around the sun has a Schwarzschild form, right, where you don't see it here. So here all these local fluctuations have been averaged out. Right? We are assuming you are at sufficiently large distance where you can think of the universe as a homogeneous fluid, and in that, over that scale, you can trust this metric.
So how many galaxies are there actually in a 1 megaparsec cube volume?
But I don't know, but this you can figure out. Yeah, it's a huge number. And the point is, the larger distance you go, more accurate this becomes, right? Because the fluctuations become smaller and smaller over larger and larger length scales. Okay, but we'll see that in fact, the earlier you go in the universe, this approximation is even better. Right? The reason that you see these fluctuations is because of the local gravitational attraction, that any small overdense region in the universe will pull matter, and that's the way these fluctuations grow. Right? So while today if you want to apply this metric, you have to do average over really large distance scales. In the early universe, you could have applied this without doing such large scale averaging. Okay, because the fluctuation would have been small enough in the early universe.
And of course the scaling factor at earlier time would have been smaller, so there's also that factor which would reduce the actual required distance, right?
Yeah, that is true. But even if you don't take into account that factor, right? Even over the co-moving scale, right? The inhomogeneity that we see in the co-moving scale today, right, is much larger than what it was in the same R coordinate. Yeah. So there is of course this factor, right? But even without this factor, this is true. That the fluctuations are growing. Are there any other questions? Okay, so let me write down the Friedmann equation again. Okay, in terms of the scale factor, this quantity lambda that we introduced, lambda of t is a of t over a naught. Okay, you measure everything in respect to today's scale. So our equation was lambda dot over lambda square plus k over a naught square lambda square is 8 pi over 3 times total rho, which was rho m plus rho r plus rho lambda. And this one I will now write as h naught square times 8 pi g over 3 h naught square. And these I will write rho m naught over lambda cube plus rho r naught over lambda to the 4 plus rho lambda naught. Okay, just using the dependence of these quantities on the scale factor. Okay, these are current values, so you have to scale by lambda appropriately to get the value at any other area. And now we recall that this quantity is 1 over rho c, 1 over the critical density. So using this, you can write this as h naught square times omega m by lambda cube plus omega r over lambda to the 4 plus omega lambda. Now we had already discussed earlier the two areas, radiation dominated that is lambda goes to 0. Okay, clearly as lambda goes to 0 this term dominates. The other one is a cosmological constant dominated. This corresponds to lambda goes to infinity. Okay, because as lambda goes to infinity, clearly this term dominates over the other two. But there is also an intermediate regime where matter dominates. Okay, so let's try to look at the condition for matter domination. So this requires first of all that this term is larger than this as well as this. So we need omega m over lambda cube is much larger than omega r over lambda to the 4. And this basically means, so this is the lambda must be much larger than omega r over omega m. Now I told you last time that omega r is like 5 times 10 to the minus 5. If you include the neutrinos, there is a factor of order 1 that multiplies it. That will not change the order of magnitude. Omega m is of the order of 0.27. So this is roughly like 10 to the minus 4. So lambda has to be larger than 10 to the minus 4 for matter to dominate over radiation. But you also need omega m over lambda cube to be larger than omega lambda. And this requires that lambda should be less than omega m over omega lambda to the power 1/3. Now this is 0.27 over 0.73 to the power 1/3, right? This is of order 1. Okay, this is a number slightly less than 1, but when you raise it to 1/3 power, it's almost equal to 1. Right? If you take a number is somewhat less than 1 and if you raise it to fractional power, it becomes closer and closer to 1.
So it should be much lesser
Pardon?
than 1. It should be much lesser than 1.
Yeah, so lambda should be much less than 1 for matter to dominate over radiation. Okay, but this basically, in fact, the condition is the lambda cube should be much less than this 0.27 or 0.73, right? So So if lambda is 1/10, okay, that's already enough, right? If lambda is 1/10, you can see that this becomes 1 over 1000, right? So 0.27 over 1000, sorry, not 0.27 times 1000, right? It's 1 over lambda. That's already larger than 0.73. Okay, so even lambda equal to 1/10 will make matter dominate over radiation. So we see that there is indeed a large window,
K to a minus.
over which then both these conditions can be satisfied simultaneously, right? Because lambda much larger than 10 to the minus 4, right? And lambda much less than say 10 to the minus 1, which is 1/10, right? Both can be satisfied simultaneously. So in this window, matter dominates over both radiation and cosmological constant. Okay, in fact, most of the interesting events in the universe, okay, at least in terms of stars and galaxy formations, okay, happen during this era. Okay, the matter dominated.
So just by looking at the events that have occurred in the matter dominated era,
Yes.
can we say that it was indeed matter dominated and nothing else could have?
Yeah, basically the point is the cosmological constant is dominated too early,
Then everything will go out.
then the things will be pulled apart and the proximity that is needed for formation of stars and galaxies wouldn't have happened. So if cosmological constant had been somewhat higher than what it is.
But if both were means of equal, then
See, both are equal today, right? But the point is, suppose before the stars and galaxies got time to form, see when it was radiation dominated, right? Stars and galaxies are not formed, right? They started forming when the matter domination started taking place. But if the cosmological constant had taken over too fast, right, then before stars and galaxies could form, matter will be pulled apart again by this rapid expansion. Okay, so you needed a large period of matter domination for all the stars and galaxies to form.
Now it is lambda dominated.
Now it's lambda dominated, but it's not really dominant because 0.27 is not that much less than 0.73. Right?
It will just started.
Yeah, so now it's taking over. Okay. But as time progresses, cosmological constant will clearly dominate more and more, right? Because matter has this 1 over lambda cube sitting in front.
by definition lambda is 1.
By definition,
Lambda is 1.
yeah, this is constant. Rho lambda not remains constant, right? This falls off.
So sir, can we show that how if in our case when lambda dominates, then we cannot have a matter like.
Yeah, that of course requires some, work, right? Just based on whatever you have done, we don't know because we have to develop the theory of formation of stars and galaxies.
Here we have created everything homogeneous, so there is no sense of.
Exactly, right. So the question is that if you given a little inhomogeneity, right, how will it grow?
Local.
They typically grow by gravitational attraction. Okay, the overdense region attracts more than the underdense region, and that's the way the perturbations grow and stars and galaxies form. Okay. But that is prevented if the universe is expanding very rapidly by the cosmological constant. Okay. Because see, while matter can clump, right, it makes sense to say that if a small fluctuation in rho can become a large amount somewhere and a smaller amount somewhere else, right? But lambda has no such property, right? Lambda is the term, lambda G mu nu is the term in the Einstein's equation, right? It doesn't make sense to have lambda vary over space coordinate. Okay? So in this sense, fluctuations can grow only if there is sufficient matter. Okay, so if the matter content was less, okay, then the fluctuations would not grow. Okay, but to see it in detail, you have to run appropriate evolution equation for small fluctuations, okay, and that you put in the values of cosmological constant and matter density, and that will tell you under what condition it grows and under what condition it fails to grow.
So we can take some matter and in the background of this metric, and then can we do?
Yeah, in the background of this metric, you can put a small fluctuation.
Okay.
Imagine that the rho m is not uniform, right, but maybe rho m has a small fluctuation, and then you can ask as it evolves, okay, how does that rho m change with time? Yeah, and that's the way you can figure out whether it will grow or not, or how fast it will grow.
So rho lambda naught is constant even when even 10 centuries later, rho lambda, the value of rho lambda will still remain the same. On the other hand, the
Yes,
value
unless something drastic happens, which is not accounted for here. Yes,
Okay.
rho lambda not will remain the same. Yes,
but h naught will increase.
yes, H naught will.
Because the system
H naught
is
is a
accelerating, we have established.
Yeah,
that.
H naught will increase.
So
Yes,
H
that's
naught
right.
must increase.
Yeah.
The current time 10 centuries
Well,
later.
So
Yes.
H naught is constant.
No, H naught is dependent on the current time. 10
Yeah,
centuries
but see,
later,
H naught.
the current time
Yeah,
would
but the
be-
point, if you look at this equation, right? Okay, from this equation, you see that H naught will actually approach a constant because rho lambda is a constant, right?
H naught is constant. It is defined.
No, my point is omega lambda should increase, but if H naught is increasing, omega lambda seems to be decreasing.
Yeah, but H naught will not increase. Okay, because when you say it's accelerating, okay, it's lambda double dot which is increasing, which is positive. Right? But that is different from saying that lambda dot over lambda will increase. Right? Because the time derivative of lambda dot over lambda has two terms, right? One is lambda double dot over lambda, but there is also a lambda dot over lambda whole square term. You see, what accelerating universe means lambda double dot is positive, right? But the ddt of lambda dot over lambda is lambda double dot over lambda minus lambda dot square over lambda square. Right? So this is positive, but this whole thing is not positive.
Okay.
Right?
So H naught might.
Yeah. So yeah. So basically, you can see from here that as lambda goes large, right, this ratio goes to a constant, right? Because 8 by g over 3 is constant, right? These are falling off.
So this.
Right? So rho lambda is constant. Okay? So H naught basically will become a constant as it increases. Okay, but the second derivative of lambda will increase, will keep increasing. That's the sense in which it's accelerating.
So we see that
Solve this equation, right? If you ignore these two terms, right, then you can solve this and lambda will be exponential in h. Lambda is basically e to the h naught t.
so lambda dot over lambda, the exponentials will cancel. So
Exactly.
we have to
Yeah.
constant.
That's why lambda dot over lambda is constant. But lambda double dot is positive because it's
Lambda dot
exponential. Yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay. So what you argued is that there is indeed a large region in the lambda space where it was matter dominated. And so in that region we can use, in that range of lambda, we can use a formula for lambda versus t that we got for matter dominated era. Right? If you remember, we derived various formula for lambda versus t, assuming the radiation dominates, matter dominates, and cosmological constant dominates. So in this range, when lambda is much larger than 10 to the minus 4 and much less than 1, you can use that formula. But of course, the exact formula also you can get in principle, at least numerically, by solving this differential equation, right? How lambda varies as a function of time.
From that we will get the estimation of the time scale.
Pardon?
The time scale we can know from this solving.
Yeah, so by solving this, if you know lambda, if you know something interesting happens at some value of lambda, you can work out what time it happens. Okay? Because this, by solving this equation, you can get lambda versus time relation.
in case of radiation dominated era, we use the fact that at some point there is a beginning of time, so we set the origin of time to be zero.
To be zero, exactly.
But for matter dominated or cosmological constant dominated, at least at this stage, we cannot.
No, you cannot do anything, but the point is roughly, we'll do this maybe gradually. I mean, in the middle of the matter dominated era, for example, okay, that constant, you can basically set equal to 0. Okay, basically what happens is that, so who has to do to start counting that constant from, right? From the end of radiation dominated era.
Which constant?
that T plus C, we don't know it, solution
No.
of a differential equation has T plus C to some power, right?
Mhm.
So you can put that, calculate that C by putting a boundary condition at the end of the radiation dominated era.
Yes.
Right? But basically the time that elapses during the radiation dominated era is so much smaller than the one in matter dominated era, because that constant C is essentially, you can say, equal to 0. Okay? But like, I mean, we will discuss this maybe.
So we say radiation, we cannot directly go from radiation dominated to matter dominated. There will be a region
Exactly.
between. But then how can we determine the constant based on the intermediate region? Because according to calculation.
Yes. So the point is that to really determine that constant, you have to solve the equation through the intermediate region. But what I am saying is that when you have gone deep into the matter dominated era, right? Lambda has increased by many folds, right?
Mm.
In that era, this constant, even though in principle you could calculate it starting from radiation dominated era, right? You can show that this constant is basically negligible compared to the time that elapses in the matter dominated era. Right? So from that point of view, even though this constant, to calculate it requires hard work, right? But for most practical purposes it's not relevant, because that constant is very small compared to the time that the universe spends in the matter dominated era. Okay, so from this we can also see that matter and radiation energy density are equal at some point in the past. So equality of matter and radiation
of matter and radiation.
These happen at lambda of order 10 to the minus 4. Right? Because, and so lambda has to be much larger than omega r over omega, which is 10 to the minus 4, for matter to dominate over radiation. So when lambda is of order 10 to the minus 4, matter and radiation energy density would have been equal. Right? You can set these two equal. And again, there is a little uncertainty here, because it depends on whether you count the neutrinos or not count them in this thing, but that's factor of order 1. Okay, because if you count the neutrinos, as we discussed, this radiation energy density will get an extra multiplicative factor, but that's of order 1. Okay, now to proceed, we need more information about the dynamics of the universe, and for this the important thing that we need to study is what happens to the temperature. Okay? Because a lot of what's going on in the universe, okay, now the temperature is not very relevant, right? Microwave background is so cold that it doesn't affect the rest of the universe. Okay? However, in early days, okay, if the temperature was higher, intuitively you can see that if the universe was smaller, the temperature would have been higher. Okay? But we want to now study exactly how much higher it would have been. Okay? And that will tell us how to study the universe at a very early time. So temperature, in general, we expect is a function of time. And the question is, how do we determine this? So there are two ways that we will discuss. Okay. One is just by comparing energy density. Okay. So we know that the radiation energy density is given by k to the 4, where k is some constant. We have also seen that rho r folds of inverse has 4th power inverse power of lambda. So if we compare this, we see that T should be equal to T naught over lambda.
Linearly.
Right? In other words, rho r is k to the 4, rho naught, which is today, is k T naught to the 4. This is the CMB temperature today. This is 2.73 degree Kelvin. So just knowing that rho r and rho r naught relation, you can calculate the T and T naught relation. Is this okay? So there is also another way to get at the same relation, okay, where it's worth examining it. So let's suppose that we are here, okay, r equal to 0, and we are observing the CME photons, the cosmic microwave background, the photons which are coming to us. And let's suppose that nu naught is the frequency of a cosmic microwave background photon we observe. Now this photon of course has been travelling to us from somewhere, okay, and we will later learn from where they are coming from. But we can ask that, let's suppose that we look at the same photon which has reached us today, okay, with frequency nu naught, but how would we have looked at an early time, at time t. Now of course at time t it would not be here, right? It will be somewhere else. So let's imagine this, the photon that is travelling, that we are seeing today, okay, this is t equal to t naught. Somebody else, okay, far in the past at say time t, sitting at the point r, observe the same photon. Okay, and you want to know what will be the frequency that this person observes that photon with. Now this calculation in fact is identical to the calculation we did earlier, okay, with a slightly different interpretation. So let me do it again here. Okay. So we calculate the time, okay, we calculate the relationship between Tr and T naught r equal to 0. So my integral dt over a of t from t to t naught, so let me call it dt prime, is integral 0 to r naught dr over 1 minus k r square, 0 to r. It's clear the photon is travelling along null geodesic, right? So this is the equation. And now suppose that we do the same thing for t plus delta t, okay, the another photon, okay, or better still the peak and the valley of the same electromagnetic wave. Okay, the peak arrives at t naught, the valley arrives at t naught plus delta t naught. Okay, so you write the same equation again, p prime prime over a t prime 0 to r dr prime over square. So subtracting these two, you get delta t naught over a t naught delta t at. So nu naught, which is 1 over delta t naught, is at over a naught times 1 over delta t, so we basically is lambda of t times nu of t. Okay. Or you can reverse it, nu of t is 1 over lambda t times nu naught. Is this clear? Okay. So this says that what we are observing today as a photon of frequency nu naught, okay, same photon but somebody else far in the past at time t would have observed as a photon of a different frequency nu of t, which is nu naught over lambda of t. And this is true irrespective of what frequency of the photon you observe today. Okay, every photon that you observe today would have been scaled by this factor. Now today when you look at the microwave radiation, of course we don't have a single frequency, right? We have a multiple frequency, and the fact that they are black body radiation means that they follow a distribution law. Okay. So black body distribution so this tells us how the total energy or the total photon number is distributed among the various frequencies. But the important point for us, okay, we don't need the details. The important point for us is that it's a function of h nu over k. Okay, this is Planck's formula. Right? The black body spectrum is a function of h nu over k. So now you see that if we take today's black body spectrum, okay, and convert it to a slightly different spectrum, okay, where all the news are scaled. Okay, that if you observe something today as frequency nu, okay, somebody else at a time t was observing the same frequency, or if you observe today at frequency nu naught, somebody else was observing it as frequency nu, which is like this. So what will be the interpretation given by that person? That person will try to interpret this as a distribution of the different temperature. Okay, and the different temperature will be given by identifying this relation nu of t over t of t should be equal to nu naught over t naught. Okay, so effectively we see that t of t will be t of t naught T naught, which is equal to T naught times nu of t over nu naught, which is 1 over lambda t.
Can you repeat this argument?
Yeah. So we observe today black body spectrum at various frequencies, right? And using that frequency distribution, okay, we arrive at the conclusion that the temperature is some T naught. Okay. But how do we arrive at the conclusion? We feed it with this function, right? F of h nu naught over k T naught, that determines T naught. Now we are saying that the same photon that you observe today, right? So for every photon that you observe today, right, this person sitting far away, okay, at some far past, would have observed exactly the same photon but at a different frequency. Right? So to that person it will correspond to a different distribution. Right? But they are simply related. Right? They are related simply by scaling nu. Right? What you are observing today as nu naught, that person would have observed as nu, which is scale frequency. So the natural thing for that person will be to assign a new black body distribution spectrum with a different temperature. Right? Because f of h nu over kt, so this function is the same except that nu has changed, okay, from nu naught to some nu of t. So you reinterpret this by saying that as if the temperature has changed. Right? If we are observing more low frequency, more high frequency objects, right, that means you are also observing that effectively temperature is high. Right? That's the conclusion. Right? Earlier in the far past, a frequency nu naught today would have looked high. Right? Because nu of t is 1 over lambda of t times nu naught, right? Lambda would have been smaller. So if the spectrum gets uniformly shifted to higher frequency, that effectively means that the temperature that will assign to the black body spectrum has become higher by the same factor. Is this point clear? And we see that indeed this relation that we see here is the same as you have gotten from the energy relation. So these are compatible.
So we can say from the Wien's law also that the temperature corresponds to the maximum energy or the maximum.
Yes. So temperature corresponds to the maximum of the wavelength or frequency, right, up to the scaling of h over k.
That will be different for different observers.
That will be different for different observers. So the maximum of the frequency is going to shift. Right? Consequently, temperature has to be shifted. that at this time, when matter and radiation are equal, the temperature of the universe was high. So at lambda equal to lambda matter radiation equality, T would have been of the order of 10 to the 4 times 2.73 Kelvin. Right? Because it's getting Kelvin scale by 1 over lambda. Right? Lambda equal to 10 to the minus 4, so T would have been 10 to the 4 times 2.73 Kelvin.
This will be the temperature of the radiation, right?
Yes, this will be the temperature of radiation at that time.
Since we are assuming that it is not interacting with the matter, then the temperature of matter can be something else.
Yes, exactly. Because so far we are not assuming that temperature of the radiation and matter are coupled, right? But soon you have to give up that idea,
Yeah.
right? And we will see under what condition you have to give that up.
In this temperature, it is not that much high.
Yeah, let's see what happens at this temperature. So this gives you in degree Kelvin, right? But it's useful to convert it to energy. Okay. So to do that, we can multiply by Boltzmann constant. Okay, let me write down the Boltzmann constant. So the value of the Boltzmann constant Kb is 8.62 times 10 to the
20.
minus 5 electron volt. I am writing it in terms of electron volt. Okay, that will be a very useful unit. Right? Hertz is not a useful unit because you don't know other things in terms of hertz.
Engineering.
Okay. So electron volt per degree Kelvin. So using that, we can see that Kb times T equality. This is what? This is of the order of 1 electron volt, right? 8.62 times 2.73 electron volt is times 10 to the minus 1.
Nearly order 1.
Of the order of 1 electron volt. Now at 1 electron volt, still not much interesting things happen. But if the temperature was 10 times higher, okay, namely at lambda of order 10 to the minus 5, kBT would have been about 10 electron volt. So at a temperature of this order, something interesting happens. So if you recall, the hydrogen ionization energy is about 13.6 electron volts. Okay. So if you heat up the ordinary matter that we see today, right, say hydrogen, at this temperature, it would have been ionized. Yeah, it would have been composed of electrons and protons and not hydrogen.
At this time, hydrogen atom formed.
Yeah, so now the point is that here of course we are doing it backwards, right? This is not the way we should try to do. Yes, we can try to reconstruct what happened earlier by working backwards, right? And so if we take our present universe and start heating it up, again, indeed at 10 to the 5, when lambda is 10 to the minus 5, interesting things will start happening. Okay. But the actual evolution of the universe of course happened in the forward direction, right? So the universe must have started from a very high temperature, okay, and then slowly cooled down. Okay. So you have to understand that as the universe cools down, okay, so at very high temperature, okay, the hydrogen wouldn't have remained hydrogen, okay, there would have been protons and electrons, okay, and not hydrogen. And you have to understand what happens as you cool the universe down. Okay, that is the right way to ask the question, right? Not what happens when you take the present universe and heat it up. Okay. And these two are not quite the same phenomena because it's a time dependent process, right? It's not in equilibrium. If you are always in equilibrium, then of course it doesn't matter whether you go backward or forward, right? At any given temperature you can see what the equilibrium configuration is. Okay. But because the universe is evolving as a function of time, equilibrium is not the right thing to use. You have to really study the dynamics, okay, of formation of these objects.
So since it is not in equilibrium, how are you defining temperature?
Well, the point is, you can think of, yeah, the point that you have to play a game. The point is, there is a slight non-equilibrium process, right, which is responsible for this formation. Okay. But the number of photons is so much larger than the number of protons and electrons that you can still define a temperature for the photon. So basically, what is out of equilibrium is this process that the photon dissociates hydrogen into protons and electrons. Okay, but the number of photons is huge, right? So you can define the equilibrium by saying that that's the temperature of the photon. Okay. What is not in equilibrium process is what is happening to that proton and electron.
So in that case, we define temperature as some characteristic of the black body spectrum.
Exactly. Some characteristic of the black body spectrum. Right? And it is true that there is no strict equilibrium, right? Because during this dissociation of this, for example, when the proton and electron combines from the hydrogen atom, it gives out some radiation.
Yes.
Right? But that effect of that radiation is negligible compared to what is already there. Okay? Those are very high energy photons which come out of the system, but they are very few in number compared to the actual number which is already present. Okay, in the black body radiation, the extra photons which are being produced by this process is very few. Okay, and but this of course relies on the fact, okay, which is an experimental fact, that the number of protons and electrons that we have in the universe is much smaller than the number of photons. Okay, by a factor of 10 to the 9. Okay, and that's the reason why you can still talk about equilibrium of the photons without taking into account this proton electron system. Okay, so let me go back a little more, or maybe a lot more, and then describe the history of the universe. So, by extrapolating, we can see that as you go further and further past in time, the temperature must have been hotter and hotter, right? Because lambda is increasing, so T would have been higher. Unless the equation of state changes and universe was not expanding earlier, right? But that we are not assuming. We are assuming that as it's standard physics. Okay. However, things do change during this process, okay? Because, for example, when the temperature becomes larger than 0.5 MeV, okay, that is electron mass. Okay. Then the electron would have been relativistic, right? And the photons would have the average energy of the photon, right, when it's of the order of an MeV, it could produce electron-positron pair.
Yes.
So then the universe would have contained not just photons but also electrons and positrons, okay, as relativistic particles. Okay. You could still treat this as a radiation-dominated universe, as radiation, okay, except that when you calculate this constant k, rho as k T to the 4. The calculation of this constant k will change, right? I already told you that because of the neutrinos there is already a contribution. Okay. But now you also have to add the contribution from the electron positrons, right? Because those are treated as relativistic particles. Okay. And like, of course, this happens over a period, right? I mean, it's not that they change from non-relativistic to relativistic immediately, right? So during the period when the temperature is falling through the mass of the electron-positron pair, then you have to do more detailed analysis, okay? Because this k will change slowly, right? K will also depend on lambda. K is not a constant anymore. Okay. Nevertheless, the equation of state, okay, roughly will look as if it's radiation dominated for most part, okay? But this constant k will keep jumping. Okay. So when the temperature becomes larger than a GeV, okay, then the protons and neutrons will start behaving like relativistic particles. Okay. In fact, also something interesting happens in between. Okay. When the temperature becomes larger than the nuclear scale, the nuclear binding energy scale. Okay. Then the usual nuclei, okay, if the helium nuclei, for example, right, it would not have been bound as a helium nucleus. Okay, it would have been been there as free protons and neutrons. Okay, because even if you bind into helium, okay, or some other compound, deuterium or some other compound for a little while, just by bombarding with the photons of very high energy, it would have dissociated. Okay. So a lot of these things happen during this time, right? So the idea that you start from a very very hot universe, okay, maybe hot so that all known elementary particles are relativistic.
All processes.
Okay, so that's your starting point. All known elementary particles are relativistic. Right? That will happen about say 500 GeV or so, because even the Higgs will be relativistic in that regime. Okay. Then you start cooling down. Okay, and then you study the whole process of cooling down. Okay, at each stage what can happen using known physics. Right? As long as you know, for example, how the elementary particles interact. Okay, we can follow the evolution of the universe and study what happens in various stages. And using this picture, we can make a lot of prediction about the current universe, okay, which depends on the history of the universe. Right? Because if you start from a known state of the universe, right, a very high temperature state where all particles are relativistic, and then if all the physics is known in between, then you could figure out in principle, okay, the full evolution of the universe and what it would look like today. Okay. So using this, for example, one can predict, okay, reasonably accurately the abundance of light elements. Okay. For example, how much is the ratio of helium to hydrogen today? Okay. What determines that? Right? What determines that is the following: that at some point there are no helium or hydrogen, everything are neutrons and protons, right, at a sufficiently high temperature. As the universe starts cooling, right, those neutrons and protons start binding into nuclei. Right? The process of binding, right, how efficient the binding process is, will depend on the binding energy, various interactions and so on. But if you know nuclear reactions well, you could calculate those, right? And you could see during that process of binding, okay, what fraction will become helium, what fraction will remain as free protons, which are hydrogen, okay, what fraction will become deuterium and so on. Okay, so this way you can calculate this what we call the light element abundance. Okay, what fraction of light elements will be there with various frequencies. Heavy elements are not calculated this way because most of the heavy elements are actually formed in stars much later. Okay, but this is primordial nucleosynthesis. Okay, that this happens much before the stars and galaxies are formed. So this is one of the successful predictions of this evolution of the universe. Right? Using nuclear physics, we can make a very good prediction of the ratio of hydrogen and helium, okay, and also other elements like lithium and so on. Now let's come back to lower temperature, okay, where you have been studying. Okay. So we can ask, what is the last interesting thing that would have happened during this whole process? Okay. And the last interesting thing that happens, okay, before of course stars and galaxies form, okay, which is also interesting, but before that, okay, at this microscopic scale, the last interesting thing that happens is the final binding of electrons and protons into hydrogen. Okay, the helium binding happens earlier. Okay, that's because helium ionization energy is larger. Okay. So electrons will have bound to helium, okay, before they bind to protons to make hydrogen. Okay. So the last event, okay, interesting event is the electron binding to protons. Now, if you look at it naively, okay, if it is a purely equilibrium process, one would expect that would happen when lambda is larger than when lambda of the order of 10 to the minus 5. So lambda now is increasing, you remember? Right? Because you are now running forward in time. Okay. When lambda reaches 10 to the minus 5, okay, the temperature would have come down to about the ionization energy. Okay. So naively one would expect that as the temperature falls below that, okay, the protons and electrons will bind. Okay. But in actual practice, it turns out it's a slow process. Okay, it's in fact not very efficient, okay, to actually bind electrons to hydrogen, and eventually it happens. Okay, the E minus plus P of hydrogen. Okay, typically, what will happen is the E minus P will form hydrogen with certain probability, and then P will dissociate by interacting with photons with certain probability. Okay. In equilibrium, this will balance. Okay, but in out of equilibrium, of course, one will win, and then you have to see under what condition this wins. It turns out that this happens at lambda of order 10 to the minus 3, not 10 to the minus 5.
To equilibrium, right?
Pardon?
As your radiation is fall down,
Yes.
the density of your particular energy, like 13.6 electron volt energy, will fall down, and they will come to an equilibrium. These These relationships.
The point is, the reason that they don't come to equilibrium is because the protons are very dilute in the universe. Okay, so for the electron and proton to find each other, that's a very small probability, because the number density of electrons and protons is very small, right? As I say, compared to number density of protons. It is small today, but it was small even then. Okay? That's what slows down the process. Okay, that's one thing, of course. The other thing is that the final transition that takes you from an excited state to a ground state. Okay? That's also a slow process. Okay, so but one can do this calculation, and at the end of the calculation, one finds that eventually the process is completed at this value of lambda. Okay, 10 to the minus 3. When the temperature actually fell much below 13.6 electron volt, right? Because you have seen that even at 10, lambda is 10 to the minus 4, right? The temperature is only about electron volt, right? So it actually falls to 1/10 of the electron volt, okay, before this process actually completes. Okay, it's of the order, right? 10 to the minus 3. Okay, order of magnitude is 10 to the minus 3.
So at this temperature, the hydrogen atoms seem to be more than electron atoms.
Yes, at this temperature, basically most of the electrons and protons are bound to hydrogen atom. Drastic effect on what we see today, okay, because above this temperature, okay, when electron and proton stayed as electrons and protons, even though they are few in numbers, their scattering cross section of photons was large, okay, because they are charged particles, okay, and photons always feel the charge, right? So if there are free charged particles hanging around, it's like through a plasma, okay, you cannot pass light, right, because the scattering of light, okay, is much larger in a plasma than a neutral material.
So sir, the charge plasma looks like opaque.
Yeah, so plasma would look opaque, okay, that to photons. Okay. So the same thing happened to the universe above this temperature, okay, or below this lambda. Okay. Universe was opaque, that photons were scattering very frequently with the existing electrons and protons. But once the temperature fell below this, okay, so this is what P is as of the order of 10 to the 3, right? Times 2.7. Once the temperature fell below this, then the universe essentially becomes transparent, okay, because once the electrons and protons bind into hydrogen atom, okay, now it's neutral. Okay. Now the interaction with photons is only dipole interaction, right? Hydrogen atom doesn't have a monopole charge, right? It's only dielectric dipole, and those are much weaker interactions. Okay. So effectively, the photons don't scatter after that, okay, or scatter very rarely. Okay. And most of the microwave photons that we see today, okay, are basically unscattered from that day. Okay. So this way you can say that the microwave radiation that we are seeing today, okay, are in fact they originated the journey at this temperature, okay, or when the universe was much younger, when lambda was 10 to the minus 3.
Before that we cannot know.
Before that,
Before that temperature,
yes.
the radiation which started, that doesn't reach us.
So radiation was there, of course.
But it doesn't reach us.
It because it scatters, right? So it doesn't reach us directly, right? It may reach us after scattering many times, but then it loses all information about where what was the state before.
It will just noise.
Yeah, it will just become like noise, right? So what you are seeing today, right, in the microwave, you can think of as the image of the sky, okay, or what the universe was, okay, when the scale factor was 10 to the minus 3. Is this point clear?
Sir, how do you know that the photon that we see today, those are from this?
Because you can calculate how much would be the scattering. Once the universe become opaque or become transparent, right, you can calculate what will be the scattering probability of a photon from a proton or electron or from a hydrogen atom, right? And you can show that scattering probability is much less than 1, which means most of the photons that we are seeing today are unscattered from that era. Right? Of course, there will always be some scattered photons, right? The scattering probability is not 0, but it's very, very small, right? So you can ignore it for all practical purposes.
Can you again explain why, E minus plus P towards, H, that reaction will be in forward direction?
Well, Why is it like this?
Yeah, not inequality.
Yeah, because the point is there are always photons, right? Okay. Photons follow a black body distribution. Okay. So in a black body distribution, even though the temperature has fallen below, okay, there is always some photon which is high energy. Okay. So that's one aspect. That those high energy photons can kick the E minus P, the hydrogen atom back to E minus P. Okay. But the dominant reason why this is slow, okay, is simply because the process of binding, that E minus and P has to find each other, right? And then they have to bind. Right? That process is very slow. Right? You can calculate. I mean, this is of course a well understood atomic physics problem, right? If it's simpler than even normal atomic physics, just electron proton system. Okay. So you can calculate how the whole binding process, right? And based on that analysis, you find that, and then you put it back in this evolving universe, right? And based on how much time it takes and how the universe evolves in that time, you can show that the actual value of lambda, right, at which this process completes is like this. Right? You can give some qualitative reasoning, but of course final result is found numerically. Right? You basically solve this ionization equation numerically, and this is what we arrive at.
So we cannot know what happened before this 10 to the power minus 3.
Well, you cannot know by looking at the microwave background. Right? Of course, you can calculate theoretically what happened.
I mean, observe.
Yeah, so the microwave background, right, that's direct observation of microwave background does not tell us what happened before that.
Is there any other thing which can tell us?
Well, gravity waves, for example, if you could discover primordial gravity waves, right, gravity scatters even less. Right? So those can contain information about the universe at a much earlier scale, time scale. Now, one of the features of the microwave background is that it's highly isotropic. Okay? In whichever direction you look, it looks the same. Okay? Well, it doesn't look quite the same. Okay? There is a small fluctuation in temperature, but the temperature fluctuation in CMB temperature is of the order of 10 to the minus 5 fractional. Okay, so delta T over T. In other words, if you look in different directions of the sky, okay, you find that delta T over T is of order 10 to the minus 5, okay, between different angular directions.
So this is after when you remove that Doppler effect.
Well, you don't have to remove the Doppler effect because if, yeah, remove the Doppler effect meaning our motion. Yes, you have to remove our motion through the microwave background. Okay? But that actually effect is not by that much. Okay? Our motion through the microwave background, that doesn't affect.
So sir, there is a case like when you actually cannot remove such like this isotropic, I am thinking like probably you can always make your radiation isotropic.
No, not by just changing one velocity.
Yeah.
No, I mean not every radiation. You can certainly consider a angular distribution,
Okay.
which you cannot make isotropic by just assigning an overall velocity to the observer. Right? But in any case, the point is this overall velocity, the effect of this overall velocity is very small, right? Because what you are, the thing that controls it is V over C, right? And our velocity through the microwave background is much smaller than C, right? So that effect you can ignore to first approximation. Okay. So what does this mean? Right? The fact that the microwave temperature is fluctuating so little. Okay. So this means that universe at the time of last scattering. So this event is called last scattering, okay, or recombination. This is last scattering for the photon that we see today. Scattered last. Okay. So we define a hypothetical surface, okay, which is called last scattering surface. Okay, it's in fact not a fixed surface in the universe, but it basically means the following. Okay, imagine imagine that we are here. Okay, we can always make us at the center of the universe, r equal to 0. And you look at microwave radiation coming from these different directions. At lambda equal to 10 to the minus 3, whichever direction we look, they would have been at the same radial distance. Right? Because we have isotropic, right? So, all the microwave background that we are seeing today came from this surface. They last scattered on this surface.
This is S2 sphere.
Pardon? Yeah, this is a sphere. S2.
Two-dimensional
Two-dimensional sphere. At which the microwave those microwave backgrounds are originating. Right? Now, this of course doesn't mean that there is something special about that surface. Okay? Because what is special about the time that at which they originated? Okay? We think of this as a surface just because we are observing it from one point. Right? If somebody else observed it from another point, there will be a different surface of last category. Is that clear? Right? Because its time is changing, right? But at that time, whichever photon originated here are reaching us today. Right? That's what it means.
So the radius of the circle is a fundamental thing.
Yeah, exactly. So radius of the circle is a fundamental thing. Right? This tells how far it was from us.
And also with time the radius will change.
Yes, with time the radius will change. So you can always think in a co-moving radius in the r coordinate. Right? So where you don't have to worry about its changing. Right? But the physical radius of course will change because it's getting multiplied by lambda. Is this point clear? So this is known as the surface of last category. And the fact that the temperature is so uniform means that the state of the universe over this whole region must have been very, very uniform over the surface. Is this clear? Okay, that fluctuation would have been 1 in 10 to the 5. Which of course looks much more homogeneous than what we see today. Okay? Today the fluctuation at our scale, solar system scale, is much larger. So this is saying that the universe was much more homogeneous at that time for some reason. Okay, and one of the problems in modern day cosmology is to start from that state of the universe where it was homogeneous with the fluctuation of order 1 in 10 to the 5 and show how we evolved, right? How stars and galaxies form. And it turns out that 1 in 10 to the 5 is just enough to form the stars and galaxies that we see today.
So this inhomogeneous.
If it was 1 in 10 to the 8, okay, with that initial condition you couldn't have formed the stars and galaxies that we see today. Right? But the 1 in 10 to the 5, right, there has been sufficient time so that gravitational collapse, okay, with that initial condition is enough for stars and galaxies to form. Okay. In fact, using this, the fact that we have stars and galaxies today, okay, people already knew before they discovered the fluctuation in the microwave background that fluctuations must happen there.
So these fluctuations arises because of the quantum fluctuation?
Yes, so we will maybe discuss it later, yes, but then the question is how did the fluctuations arise in the first place? And that it turns out one of the theories of this, okay, is inflation, which assigns it to quantum fluctuations in the early universe. Okay, but for now we just say that there are these fluctuations that we know from experiment, okay, and those are the fluctuations that led to formation of stars and galaxies eventually.
Sir, when we are talking about stars and galaxies, then our length scale is different, right?
Exactly.
It's very small length scale. So these are like local particles kind of thing.
No, but the point is, even over that small length scale, these fluctuations are not there. Even, okay, so if you take the fluctuations which are there at that time, over that length scale, okay, we see the fluctuation. And we see in today's universe, okay, what is the fluctuation at that length scale? It is much larger.
Okay.
So, yes, you are right that to really explain solar system, right, you have to look at fluctuations at a very, very small scale. Okay, and that we don't have that kind of resolution. Okay, but if you just take the length scale over which the fluctuations are observed, and if you compare today's what they become today, what that length scale has become today, and look at the fluctuations over that length scale.
It is much higher.
It's much higher today. Okay? So you need the theory of growth of fluctuations. And the other point is that even though we don't directly know what the fluctuations are, there is a theory of these fluctuations, right, which tells us how the amplitude depends on the scale, okay, which is called the scale invariant spectrum. Using that theory, you can figure out what the fluctuation would happen at a very, very smaller length scale, even though you cannot see it directly. Okay. And that you can then translate to what we see today. Okay, and what, as I was saying, that you find that indeed what you see today is consistent with scale invariant fluctuation. Okay. But if the amplitudes had been much lower, then it wouldn't be consistent. Okay, so one of the issues that we'll be addressing eventually is this homogeneity. Okay, so we see that the universe at the time of last scattering at lambda equal to 10 to the minus 3 must have been homogeneous over this length scale, over this, that this part of the universe and this part of the universe are more or less identical.
So,
Yes.
so this is a CMB fluctuation equation, right?
This is experimental observation.
Means in the present time.
Present time, yes.
As in the last experiment, it was also the same, right?
Yeah, because we are calculating delta t over t, right? Both delta t and t would have been scaled by the same factor.
But sir, in discussing the distance has, if we in the means initial time the distance at this, then now the distance we calculate,
Yes.
then it will be given a.
See, we look over the angular scale, right? In the angular scale, okay, that doesn't change, right? So you look at, say, a certain angular scale over which you observe these fluctuations, okay, and you translate that angular scale into distances. Okay. So this is variation over an angular scale. Right? If you think in a from one angle to another angle, right, then you don't have to worry about the distance. Right? As I said, to really make sense of this, you have to write the scale invariant spectrum, right? And this is the overall constant that appears in that scale invariant spectrum, because the actual amplitude, of course, depends on the scale. Okay? On smaller length scales, you have a different kind of fluctuation. Larger length scale will have a different kind of fluctuation, but the dependence on that scale is fixed, okay, by this scale invariant formula. Okay. Then only question is what is the overall coefficient, okay. And the dimensionless coefficient that controls this is 10 to the minus 5. Right? That's what it means by this being 10 to the minus 5. Okay. So, as I was saying, this uniformity of the CMB spectrum or the isotropy of the CMB spectrum implies that the universe must have been nearly homogeneous over a very large scale. Right? What looks to us a very large scale today, okay, take two CMB photons coming from two opposite ends. Okay? They are separated at the surface of last scattering, they are separated by certain amount. Okay, you can calculate the distance. And you could also calculate what the distance would have been at lambda equal to 10 to the minus 3. Right? It would just get scaled by a factor of 10 to the 3. Okay, or 10 to the minus 3. So that would have been a distance over which the universe must have been homogeneous. At least over that distance. And we'll see later that this is an apparent conflict with some known physical laws. Okay? And we'll discuss what an apparent conflict is and how to resolve it at that scale, at that early time, over a large scale, right? We'll make it more quantitative later. Okay, now let me just define some quantities. Okay. Now forget about this thermal history a little bit. Okay, and come back to gravity. So we will now introduce the notion of age of the universe. So age of the universe is what we have been calling T naught, the value of T today. Right? Why is it T? Because the metric, in front of dt square there is nothing, right? So the T is really the proper time. Okay, if you are sitting at a fixed point in R, right? So age of the universe is defined as the proper time of a observer who is stationary in this R coordinate system, R theta 5 coordinate system, say at R equal to 0, right? Since the Big Bang, okay, since T equal to 0. So we start with this equation, lambda tot over lambda square as h naught square times omega r over lambda to the 4 plus omega n over lambda cube plus omega lambda. Convert this to an equation between t and lambda. So dt, you just take square root and then rearrange things. So dt is d lambda over lambda times square root of omega r over lambda square plus omega n plus omega lambda, which you can also write as lambda d lambda.
So omega lambda to your 4,
Omega lambda,
the under square root.
yes,
Omega r by lambda to the 4.
omega lambda to the 4.
No, the first term.
Oh, first term is omega r over lambda to the 4. So what you do now is that you basically multiply by factor of lambda both in the numerator and denominator. Okay, so lambda d lambda, this becomes lambda square, and then you take it inside the square root, okay, which becomes lambda to the 4. So this becomes omega r plus omega lambda plus omega lambda. Lambda to the 4.
Is it 8 zeros?
Pardon?
80.
Yeah, 80 square term we forgot. So this is I think 80 inverse because dt will come is 80 inverse. So then you get T naught, which is today's time, which is from 0 to T naught dt, and then you can convert it to lambda, so h naught inverse. See, h naught by definition is today's h, right? H naught is really a constant. Okay, h naught is not lambda dot over lambda. Lambda dot over lambda is written separately. So h naught inverse. Oh, I should have also said that I have ignored the k over a naught square term. Okay, in writing this there is also a k over a naught square. But as I said, because this is very small, okay, consistent with 0 in all present experiments, I just said it. Okay. Now, this formula is of course not strictly valid very early in the universe because these coefficients should have changed, right? Because omega r we are assuming no exchange of energy between matter, radiation, etc. Right? But in the early universe, when it's radiation dominated, which means that when lambda is so small that these are small compared to this, okay, this formula would get an order 1 modification. But if you look at this formula, it should be clear that regime in fact contributes very little to this integral. Okay, because See, up to 10 to the minus 4, from 0 to 10 to the minus 4, that's the regime we are looking at, right? That's the regime where this formula may get changed, right? In the rest of the regime, when matter dominates, right, basically you can ignore this, right? These two terms dominate. So between 0 and 10 to the minus 4, the contribution of this integral is very, very small. Is it visible? If you integrate from 0 to 10 to the minus 4, right, you get half lambda square over, let's even ignore this, so omega square of omega r, okay, which is of order half lambda square is 10 to the minus 8 over square of omega r is 10 to the minus 2. Right, it's a very small number. Whereas from lambda of order 1, it's clear that this integral will be of order 1. Right? Because omega m is of order 1, right? 0.27. This is 0.73. So this integral, the actual value that you are looking at is of order 1, right? Of which the radiation dominated part contributes very little. Okay, so you can basically ignore that contribution. Okay. This also shows that the age of the universe comes mostly from the matter and cosmological constant dominated part. Right? The amount of time that the universe has actually spent in the radiation dominated era is very, very small. Okay? Doesn't mean that that's not important, because that's what eventually gave the initial condition for the rest. But as far as the time measurement is concerned, as far as the age of the universe is concerned, that contributes very little. Is this point clear? Okay. That's the reason why I was saying that when you look at this formula for the matter dominated relationship between lambda and t, there is a small constant, lambda plus t plus c to some power. Okay. That c is the time that the universe has spent in radiation dominated era. Right? But that's basically negligible. Yeah, of the order 10 to the minus 6 compared to the natural time scale. Okay. So that's why those are not very relevant. So what I'll do, basically I'll use the fact that this major contribution to this integral comes from lambda of order 1. Okay. Using that, I'll just drop this term. Okay, I could have kept it, it makes no difference. Okay. But let's suppose we drop this term. Then this becomes h naught inverse, integral 0 to 1, lambda d lambda, or square root 0.27 lambda plus 0.73 lambda t, lambda to 4. So you can calculate this. You can just put it in the mathematical and ask if you evaluate this integral. This is about 0.99. The fact that it's close to 1 is just an accident, but this is basically the integral, the value that you will get. Okay, if we just integrate it in mathematics. You can put in a factor of 10 to the minus 5 here and again redo the integral. Right? Nothing much will change in this. Okay, so roughly it's of order 1. So this tells us that the age of the universe is basically inverse of the Hubble constant. Is this clear? Because this is of order 1, so h naught inverse is the age of the universe. So let's see how big that is. H naught inverse. If you say H naught was about 65 kilometer per second per megaparsec, right? So let's put everything in centimeters. So 65 times 10 to the 5 centimeter per second, and divided by megaparsec. So megaparsec is 10 to the 6 parsec. 10 to the 6 times, that was 3.086 times 10 to the 18 centimeter. Is it okay? And I'm just putting all of these in centimeters in seconds, so you can cancel. So you can see the centimeter cancels, of course. And so T, which is H naught inverse, okay, now you can get it in second. So that's 10 to the 6 times, this is 3.086 times 10 to the 18 divided by 65 times 10 to the 5. Okay. This is second, but we will now to convert it to years. Okay. So to convert to year, we make it 1 over 365 times 24 times 60 times 60 years. Is this okay? So this you can calculate, it's about 1.4 times 10 to the 10 years, okay, which is inverse 14 billion years. Okay, so this is what we call the age of the universe. And once you have got this, you can also calculate the time scale of various interesting events that took place, right? When was last scattering? Okay, you can calculate those, and if I remember correctly, I think last scattering was about 300,000 years, which is clearly much smaller than this. Yeah, I think it's about 300,000, but I cannot be completely sure. You can easily look it up, or you can calculate.
So by calculating those conditions, that lambda equal to 10 to the minus 3.
Exactly. Yeah. So here you have integrated up to 1, right? Here you have integrated up to 10 to the minus 3. And you can figure out what. Okay. Now, one consistency check of this is that this age shouldn't be less than the age of some known object in the universe. I mean, if we find, for example, the age of the universe that is calculated this way is less than the age of the Earth, there's some problem, right? Okay. Now, so it's good to put it in perspective. So, how old is Earth, right? Earth is about 4.5 billion. It's not that much less.
Same order.
Same order of magnitude. Okay, so basically the Earth has been existing for most of the life of the universe. So not most of the life, but a significant fraction of the life of the universe.
So it's still young or
Well, you can call it whatever you like.
Universe has almost done everything.
Yeah, but there are some stars. There are some old stars which are about 13 billion years. Okay, so that's getting close. Right? Fortunately, we don't know of anything that is more than 14 billion years, so it's still consistent. Okay, but you can see that if the Hubble constant had been a little bigger, we may be in trouble. It's inversely proportional to the Hubble constant, right? So Hubble constant, if instead of being 65, had it been 100, there will be conflict with these.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's good that the Hubble constant is what it is, right? I mean, if it was larger than this, that would be actually it. So using this, we can put an up or down on how big the Hubble constant can be.
So it is not also, clear how to, measure the age of the
Yeah.
stars.
So the point is that there is some theory how it has to go in, right? So how do you know the age of the star, right? So you have to use, basically the point is you use the theory of stellar evolution. So you see the state of the star today, and from there you can try to extrapolate back as to how long it would have taken the star to evolve to this stage. Okay. So it's not completely an observation. Right?
Those theories are also in question.
Yeah, those theories. So you could go, so the one you could really found that the Hubble constant is such that the age of the universe is less than the age of those stars. Then you have to question those theories.
Or either these or this.
Rather than questioning this.
Well, the point is this is more straightforward than the calculating the age of the star. Right? So in a sense you will question the ones which are more complicated.
Sir, we calculated the 0 to 10 to the power minus 4 part. That was coming to 10 to the power minus 6 contribution to this integral, but there was a H0 inverse in front of it.
Yes.
So suppose we calculate the time there. But
Yes.
if-
H0 is today's H0.
Yes, it means H0 inverse, we put the value and we calculate the time at
Yes.
that the radiation dominated data.
That's it. Yeah.
The age of some star becomes larger than
No.
such
Yeah.
that
So of course this 13 billion years is still much larger, less than much later than when the radiation dominated era ended. See, the difference between 13 billion and 14 billion is still of the order of 1 billion, right? Whereas that was of the order of 100,000. So clearly the stars couldn't have started forming at that age.
So what is the lambda minus 3 times 300,000 years? Is it?
I think that's about 300,000 if I remember correctly. Okay, but this you can easily calculate. I will not. You just write a computer program and put in the values of omega or omega m that we have and do the calculation. Okay, so maybe I'll stop today. So tomorrow we'll introduce another notion